Let's talk about while loops. While loops are very similar to for loops, except you have a lot more control, but you also have to do things a little bit differently. You have to actually provide more information and make sure that that information is there. If you use a for loop, for example, we'll see that a little bit later on in this exercise again, you see that you have to set certain things in order for your for loop to work correctly. Otherwise, you won't have the right syntax. While loops, if you don't do things correctly, you might never know that things aren't working until you actually see something that's not working in your code. So it actually won't produce a syntax error or something like that. It just won't work right for you, and it could possibly be an infinite loop, which is just going to go on forever. Well, with a for loop, we know that we have to set up a initial value. We have to have an initial value here. $value is equal to 1. That's our initializer, just like the for loop, but we do it outside of the while. And then we have the while statement. And instead of all that other added stuff that we put on the for loop, we just have our testing condition, just like an if statement. So a while loop is closer to an if statement. Very, very powerful. It's like an if statement that can execute again and again and again until the condition is no longer met. So as long as it's true, it'll just keep going on and on and on and on, like the Energizer Bunny. It's just going to keep going. So $value is less than or equal to 3. Okay. If it is, do this. Now, we have to increment ourselves. $value plus plus needs to be executed at the end of the while statement before it comes back and tests again. Otherwise, this will go on forever. So we have that there. But we have the added freedom of putting that wherever we want to, as long as it's in that loop and as long as it's going to increment the value and get it closer to the finishing point. We could even have statements that come afterwards. So you have that freedom to put the statement wherever you want to. Really powerful, really powerful. I use while loops much more than I use for loops because you're dealing with databases, and you'll see that. You'll see different ways to work with databases. PHP is very powerful for that. And I just find it a lot easier to use while loops than for loops, but it's really up to your needs. Now we have an alternative way. Same thing, except it's easier to understand. It's a lot easier to understand for beginner programmers or people who are used to working with basic languages. Instead of the curly braces, we have a colon, and then at the end, where all the statements are there that are going to be executed within this block of code, we have an end, while, and a semicolon. So that's different than what we've seen so far, because we're not used to that at the end of our little blocks of code. But if you want to use this syntax, by all means, use it, if it makes things better for you. Easier to understand. But once you get used to the curly braces, they're everywhere, and you'll see that you can understand Java, JavaScript, C#, all different languages. When you begin to start to go back to the basic way and doing things that don't look right in other languages or that don't look the same, then you kind of keep yourself out of the loop, so to speak, for the learning of multiple languages. All right. So now we have something else, a do while. I only use a do while when I can't think of how to put this in the form of a while. What a do while does is it executes the statements within the block before it tests a condition. This can help you in certain cases, but everything is assured of being executed at least once. In the computer world, this is going to get executed 1 or more times. A standard while loop is going to get executed 0 or more times. And that means that this can actually cause, the condition here can cause the while loop to never execute if the condition is false to begin with. But this will always get executed at least once. And we definitely have to have that $value plus plus to increment it, even though it's a do while. So as you wish, you can take a look at the examples. If we look down further, you see I replaced this code. It's different than the for loop. You can switch this either way. Here's the for code. You have to comment out the while code and the $i equal 1. You have to comment that out if you want to use it with the for loop. That's up to you. But you can see the difference. I is equal to 1 is here. In the for loop, it would be here. $i is less than 5 is there, and that would be the only part of the while loop. And then we have the incrementer here at the end. It's all taken care of on the for statement there. Well, we have to do that ourselves down here at the end before it comes back. So that's the difference. And everything else is the same. This is going to make those headers change colors based on the class, the CSS class. You can see the for loop example for more information on how that works. This is just an alternative way to do things, a nested for statement. So it's more complex, but how we work here is we have an outer loop and an inner loop. The outer loop starts, and then we're going to execute it 1, 2, 3 times. And if j becomes 4, then it's going to drop out. There's our incrementer. So this is going to work with the rows, and this will be the columns. So this will go 4 times here, less than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is going to be the columns. As you can see, this is now here. We do a row, start the row, and then cell, 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 end the row, start the row, 1, 2, 3, 4, end the row, start the row, 1, 2, 3, 4, end the row. And that's how that's executed there. And you can see that is ending the rows here. Very similar to what we did with the 4. In the previous example, it's a nested loop here. Loop within a loop. Very powerful. Works often with arrays. But that's just to show you a difference between while and for. Normally you have nested for statements and not necessarily nested while statements. So we have the ending curly bracket, the curly brace here. That's for when we close out this section of code. And if we select that and then come here, we can see that this is highlighted. If we select that and go back, we can see that this part's highlighted. And here's the middle part, that one little part there. And that is what's going to get echoed out there. We see echo $i, and then we have our own incrementer. So everything works the same, just a different way of looking at it. And that's going to end the page there. So those are these boxes here, up to 6, 1 to 6, and then that is the span that we wanted to have output. I is less than or equal to 6, we start at 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very easy, very powerful.